So,
Yeah,
Simon, Simon Hunt, thank you so much for agreeing to meet me today. It's been a long time. We used to work together back in the BBC days,
absolutely. Yeah, look, so that's going back quite some time now. That is going.
way back to the
I think
early
I
early
started
2000s.
30,
Like,
yeah, I started 32 years ago.
wow, are you still there? Is
It's-
anybody still there? Does the BBC still exist? Is it?
yeah, well, where we used to work in Television Centre, that was been sold off,
Right.
and we were moved to new broadcasting house in the centre of London now. So
Oh,
it,
right.
it feels different, but
Yeah. Well, it looks fancy from what I've seen on, from
yeah,
a lot of shows and stuff from outside. It looks very fancy.
yeah.
Way nicer. It couldn't look much worse than the big concrete donut did.
Well, exactly. Although that's been well, they sold it without before they sold it. It got listed, so the property developers had to kind of keep the donut, and obviously they've made it into luxury flats now, which out of anyone's range of cost. And there's a kind of a Soho House members club, and it's really fancy now, that place.
Wow.
Really
Well,
fancy.
it wasn't fancy when we worked there, but
No,
then
it
again,
wasn't.
no
Certainly
no one wants to hear about this. But
no.
but
Exactly. We're regressing.
what people do want to hear about, or at least what I want to hear about, is your amazing discovery of something you don't see every day. And I understand that you were uh, going about your usual business. What were you doing? Was
Yeah.
it a weekend or something? You
No,
were
it's a weekday. It was actually last September. And I belong to a rowing club, and I during the kind of the nicer weather here, tend to row most mornings. We were going out. Um, this particular morning, I think we got down to the club and we were ready to get on the water for about 7 o'clock in the morning. Really beautiful morning, lovely calm, and for those who don't know, the Thames where we are, we're kind of west of central London. And it's still tidal here, so the tide was low, so you had to kind of wander out towards the middle of the river to put the boats in the water. And where I am in Brentford, say in West London, it was back in the day quite a hub of industry. There's an inlet from the river here that goes up to the Grand Union Canal, and from that you can go up to Birmingham and Manchester. So back in the day, they would bring barges up, offload the big barges onto smaller ones. They would go up the canal and off to the kind of industrial heartland of England in the Midlands. So the reason I say that is because there's lots of stuff on the foreshore. You're always seeing kind of nuts and bolts and bits of china, clay pipes, Victorian
wow.
bits. Yeah, and it's kind of there's always something. And there's always stuff around. But this particular morning, I think it was about six of us going out in our single sculls, and I was the responsible adult. So I was doing a bit of training with some of the guys, coaching, and so they'd got on the water. I was the last one to get on the water, and literally as I kind of leant over to put my boat in the water, I just saw next to it probably about a foot or so under the water. And the water at this point, because the tide was so low, the water is very, very clear, and just saw a long bone. And I've seen you sort of see bones now and again in the river that you think, I certainly assume anyway. Maybe I was wrong to assume, but assume they're animal bones or just little bits and pieces of that you see. But this was a kind of a more shapely bone. So I picked it up out of the water, thinking it would be an animal bone. Just kind of, I'd wave it and go, "Hey guys, look, I found a bone." And but as I picked it out, I kind of looked at it. I thought, I'm sure that's not an animal bone. That looks like a human. That looks like a femur. So and you can see and you'll see. I'm sure you'll share the picture later on. But you can see there's a very definitive ball joint where the hip is, and so it was kind of weird. Very, very black, very, very dark color.
I'm gonna bring it up. So I'm gonna just bring that picture up, and you sent me a photograph of it with a measuring tape next to it to show the size of it. So
Yes.
I'm just gonna
Yeah.
share my screen with that image on it. So yeah,
The
so
reason
you picked up this bone and
it's,
you recognized it immediately as a human bone.
I would say fairly immediate, not absolutely immediately. There was a little bit of kind of, because I mean, I suppose to be honest, I was thinking, surely it can't, it can't be what I'm looking at. And but it definitely, when you see it there, when you can see it there,
Right.
and you can see the ball joint at the top and the knee at the bottom. So it didn't take long to think, okay, I'm pretty sure this is a human bone. And then, of course, the next thing then is, okay, what do I do with it? And because we were going out for our morning row, I somewhat, and maybe callously, I don't know, or stupidly, or possibly put it in the boat with me, and took it for a little row up to Richmond, a couple of miles upstream and back with the rest of the crowd, because everybody else was on the water, and it would have been a bit of a pain for me to go back into the boathouse, and then even then, what would I do with it? So I thought I'd keep it with me. Obviously, I couldn't leave it on the foreshore because the tide would have come in and washed it away. So I wanted to make sure it's kept. But then I think it was only when we were coming back up, having rowed, that we were getting out, and obviously the other guys that were with me were coming, having a look, and then it sort of dawned on me. Then it was like, okay, well, I assumed when I saw it and thought, okay, it's human, and it's really old. And then there was a point where someone said, well, what if it's not old? I mean, this could be something more sinister. And the assumption that it's old because it looks old. But I mean, what would a 3-year-old femur look like that's been in the river for 3 years? Would it be as
It's not something you see every year, is it? Like, human
no,
bones
exactly,
around.
and there's no point of reference into what are you going to bring out of the river that is 3 years old that's human. So we put the boats away, and I found I just found a plastic bag and put it in the bag, and then took it home with the intention of phoning the police and reporting it, and just to see what happens next, really.
And so, I mean, did you at any point when you're holding this human bone, did you have these images going through your head that it was like some kind of a Sweeney Todd, victim type thing, or did you have any of these images going through your head, like who this could be, what might have happened to them?
I think that happened afterwards. So when I actually found it and put it in the boat, I think it was I think it was a bit of shock, but a bit of not quite knowing what to do with it, and we were going off to do our training session in the morning, so we just kind of did that, came back, and I think it was only then, sort of a little bit later, that I started to think, okay, and I think once I'd convinced myself that it was human, that's probably the honest answer. Once up to that point, I was just still part of me thinking, well, maybe it's not, maybe it's but I think once I recognized, actually, no, this is definitely human, then you're thinking, well, how did it get there? Who is it? And then kind of your imagination is going wild then, because you have no concept of how old it is. So then it could be, it could be a year old. It could be a very nasty murder or something. It could be sort of back in, someone from the 60s. It could be one of the kind of the gangland killing in the East End of London that's found its way up here. It's also where we are in Brentford. The river in Roman times was very, very shallow, and it's actually a Roman crossing point. So even then, thinking, oh, maybe it's a Roman relic. And then the other thing was, there's a lot of sort of medieval stuff around in this area as well, and Hampton Court Palace, sort of Tudor times, not very far up the river, and maybe it's Tudor, and you're going through all these things, and obviously having absolutely no idea really, but it was quite fun, kind of thinking what it could be, and who it could have been, and how it could have got there. So yeah, you can see the picture there. So that's with the tide, and it's pretty much its lowest, and probably sort of kind of at the bottom of the picture, sort of just in a little bit, is probably about where I found it. So where the line of the water is,
Yeah.
To the sort of bottom right.
Wow.
So yeah, so it was there was a lot of kind of wondering, you know, what it was I actually found, and but say the next thing was to phone the police and report it as an object I'd found, which was quite fun because we have a non-emergency number here for police, which puts you through to a civilian telephone operator who presumably has a kind of a series of questions they ask you, and depending on your answer, they take you through to the next set of questions and pages. And
their first question? Did you do it?
Yes. Have you got anything you'd like to tell us? So I think after my first statement, I think I found a human bone. Their kind of flowchart stopped as if like we're not quite sure where this goes next. Like who do you know, they were saying, you know, they didn't know who to contact or what form to fill in, or, you know. But anyway, it took a little while and a lot of kind of keyboard tapping, and eventually they filled in the information and said, okay, well we'll have to send some officers round to collect it and to talk to you. And they left it. That's how we left it. And this was about sort of 9 o'clock in the morning, 8:30 in the morning. So I'm in my apartment with a human bone in the flat, just waiting for the police to turn up, and they don't turn up until about 3 PM, and there was two police officers came to the door, and I think I remember this so clearly. The first thing they said was, "We've been told you think you found a human bone." I was like, okay. Well, when you say I think, and when you say yeah. Anyway, so they came in.
We have reason to believe that you are under the impression that you found something you identify as a human bone. We're here to find out if you are in fact crazy or wasting our time. Yeah. And so when they saw it, what was the reaction when you
I wish I could have videoed their faces, because their faces dropped. They immediately recognized that actually it was a human bone.
They probably get loads of calls like this, right? I mean, they probably get like, yeah, I found this bone. I think it might be a person. It was in my back garden. You come and see it. I think it might have been a murder. And they come around and it's like, yeah, it's a dog. It's a big dog.
Yeah,
this is not.
It's just not an old chicken carcass.
So it's probably, they thought they were going to get one of those. Like, oh, what does this guy?
Yeah,
what's he got now? What's in this bag?
And so they were immediately interested. And the first thing they said, "Oh, can you show us exactly where you found it?" So this is the tricky bit, because obviously I said at the Thames is tidal. So I said, well, I can show you roughly, but not exactly, because the tide will be in now. So where I found it is probably about 25, 30 foot underwater. No, you have to show it. You must show us where you found it. So fair enough. So we went down to the river, and it was a case of saying, well, you see where that seagull is? Probably about 20 foot. About 20 foot under that seagull is roughly where. So I think they're kind of a little bit crestfallen at this point that there was no crime scene to kind of tape up or mark out. And there was a lot of toing and froing going back between their offices and their kind of little walkie-talkies about, what do we do now? What form do we fill in? Who do we talk to? So there was a lot, and eventually they got some advice, and they came back to the apartment, and they took the bone off, and they said to me, well, we'll be in touch. So I think the following day, I got a call from a detective who said that she wanted to come around and formally interview me. and this, I think there'd been a wisecrack at the rowing club the day before of like, you do realise, Simon, that this is only like a couple of years old. Your DNA is all over that bone now. So you didn't really think it through. But she came around the following day, and we did a full kind of formal interview about exactly where you found it and what did you. And I just knew what was coming, because all the time, okay, tell me from the very beginning, what did you do? You found the bone. Yeah. Then what did you do? I picked it up. Yeah. Then what did you do? I put it in the boat and went for a row. It's like,
Well, you know, it's been waiting around a while by the looks of it. So
I
you know,
know, I
it
know.
could wait a bit longer, surely.
I mean, you know, a last little trip up the Thames is, you know, anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, so she just took the information and said, well, you know, they would send it off for analysis, and the first stage of that analysis would be to carbon date it and to get an idea of how old or not it was. So,
And what did they carbon date it to?
well, I think so. This was back in September. I found this, and it's only about 2 weeks ago I got the call from the detective. I mean, she'd been keeping in touch all the time, just saying, just let you know, we haven't forgotten about you, and we'll let you know when the bone comes back. And so she phoned me up about 2 weeks ago and said, well, the information's in. Have a guess how old it is. And I think I don't know, medieval. And she said no, it was. And I can't remember the exact numbers now, but it's like between 3,560 and 3,700 and something. And I'm thinking 3,000 years old. And then she said, "Oh, BC."
So it was
Okay.
actually 5,000 plus years old.
Exactly. Add another 2,000 on top of that. So nearly 5,500 years old. And I was silenced really, because I just I could not compute in my head. There was no reference frame of anything of that age. You know, if she said to me it's Roman, okay, I've seen Roman stuff in museums, and you know, I'm not. You know, of course, there's Stone Age, Iron Age stuff around, but it's not in my field of reference. So I was just blown away by it. And then, you know, and a little while after, you know, I started kind of looking at stuff online and thinking about it, and it was kind of really. I had this kind of suddenly had this feeling of a kind of a real connection to the bone. I suppose it suddenly became not a bone anymore. It became more of. I mean, obviously, as it is, it was a human being. It was a person like me living here 5,000 odd years ago, around here somewhere, doing stuff. They had family, you know. And it just starts to kind of really come to life a little bit. That's not too macabre a phrase, but
yeah, and putting that into perspective, I mean, if we're looking at 3,000 something BCE, that's like late Stone Age. Like that's
yes. I think it's classed as Neolithic.
Mhm.
And at that period it would have predated the pyramids in Egypt, predated Stonehenge, which we have here, which is that was the kind of late Neolithic Stonehenge.
Stonehenge. So this would have been around the time, or probably a little bit before they started building Stonehenge out of wood. Like it was like this was ages before they even decided to haul the stones all the way from what we now call Wales.
Yeah.
This was before they started hammering in those wooden poles.
Yeah, it's insane. And I'd say I still struggle to get my head around the idea. And and it's quite funny because the more conversations I had with people about it, you know, they said, "Oh yeah, crikey," you know. I think someone said to me, "Yeah, I wonder what London was like at that point." I was like, "Well, there's no London. You can get rid of that one straight away. No London, no England. You know, it's just like there's no concept of that. It's just land. You know, it just stuff." And you know, the river at that point, I mean, the river at the moment, you see from the picture, it's kind of very engineered. It's got kind of banks that have been built up in Victorian times to kind of channel the river in a particular way. Certainly, even back in the Roman times, when it was a crossing point, it would be more of like a floodplain with a river which is why at low tide they'd have been able to walk across quite easily. Right. So going back 5,000 years, I mean, who knows what it was like at 5,000 years? I mean, presumably there would have been some kind of waterway around here, but certainly not as we know it today.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't have been a deep river. It probably would have been wider, but sort of shallower than what we know as the River Thames nowadays. Yeah,
quite. So that's it's been fascinating, the idea of kind of trying to put that into some kind of context, I guess, is for me. Really.
Do you still have it?
I do. You want to see it, don't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. I want to see it in the flesh, so to speak,
In
even
the
though there's
kind
no
of,
flesh on it anymore.
yeah. Well, um, this will be one of its last outings because I think next week I'm taking it to the Museum of London.
Nice.
Hopefully they're going to exhibit it. So there we have it.
Wow.
Uh,
It's
uh,
amazing. I
so-
mean, it's
but
uh,
the thing that fascinates me is just how smooth the ball joint is. So
yeah,
again, I'm obviously I'm no forensic expert, but I'm assuming that this has been buried for some time, and for some reason exposed and then washed ashore where we were. So I'm pretty sure if this had been in the river, because the tidal flow is very, very strong, I'm sure this moving up and down the river for any length of time would have worn it
right.
very, very quickly, or smashed it, or
So this means there's probably the rest of the skeleton is either close to the surface or floating around as well. Like
I
it's
guess, yeah, yeah. I think I think that's probably true. I mean, it can't be that far away. Whatever, whatever wherever it is, it's either still buried where the leg was and hasn't been disturbed. That part hasn't been disturbed. But yeah, and there is in the Museum of London there is a fragment of skull, and I think it's just a kind of the bit at the top here, very small bit, which dates from the same period, which is found further downstream.
wow.
And they believe that skull was at that time the oldest thing that had been taken out of the Thames, the oldest thing they found that they could reliably date. So this now equals that. So there's
And
a
yeah, and this is like a fully intact bone. Like
yeah,
this is
yeah,
that's the thing. It's
yeah,
not a fragment of something. It's
exactly.
like
I don't want to boast, but I think this is this is slightly better than a bit of fragment of something.
yeah,
there's a
exactly.
yeah,
That's amazing. It's got the knee joint and everything. That's fantastic.
yeah.
Now the other thing about like femurs are the hardest, like they're the most solid bones in the human body, right? So
Mm.
I'm just wondering, like, will they be able to um, extract DNA from that?
Do you know what? I don't know. I don't know for sure, and I really hope they can. I hope there's enough in there for them to do it. Because you'd love to find out. I mean, for start,
That'd be
you find out if it's
amazing.
male or female.
Yeah.
I did know from a friend of a friend, someone who's not an archaeologist, which is why that picture has got the tape measure. Because when I found it, they asked me to put a tape measure so they could try and work out how tall the person would have been.
Mhm.
Which I think they came in at about sort of 5'7", 5'8", so that's sort of 5'7". But yeah, exactly that. If you can DNA it and find out if it's female. Although someone did say to me that if they did DNA it, statistically, there's every chance that they'll be related to me. Because when you think about how many people were
Yes.
around, not on the planet, but
Yeah.
here, and how that would have panned out, then
Yeah.
there's every chance that we would have some
Absolutely.
kind
I mean, even as ridiculous as it sounds, it's quite possible. I mean, the thing is, like, if they had any descendants, then it's probably related to most people in northwestern Europe.
and
Um,
that's exactly it. Yeah.
when they, because when they dug up Cheddar Gorge Man, that was, or they dug up some remains of Cheddar Gorge Man. I don't know if you remember that. It was
I remember it. Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
that was dated to something like 15,000 BCE, and apparently they did do a DNA test with that, so they extracted DNA from that, and
Wow.
they found out so many things. They found out that it was a male. They found out, probably most amazingly, they found out that what the guy who discovered it, who lived in the area, he was related, that the DNA was related to him, that he was a descendant of this person, direct descendant. And also they found out the eye color, the skin color.
Wow.
So apparently that far back, people in Britain, like we're talking like 15,000 BC, people would have been quite dark brown skinned.
Mhm.
It was before before white-skinned people like us, that Brits
Yeah.
came into the island, but blue-eyed. So they would have been. There's actually a reconstruction somewhere online. If you just Google Jeddah Gorge Man,
Yeah.
you'll see it looks like a guy from southern India, but with blue eyes, and that's what Brits look like then. What we
Right.
now call Brits, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
so if they could extract DNA from that, I mean, it's quite possible they could get DNA from this and find out similar things like eye
Yeah.
color, skin color, all kinds of things like that about
Yeah.
who this person was. And like
I
you
hope
say,
so.
what sex they were.
Yeah, I say I'm meeting one of the curators at the museum next week, and I've got a meeting on Monday, so I'm going to hand over the bone because it has no place in my house anymore, and find out what the next step is, and what happens next.
That'd be amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll definitely be following this story to find out what the updates are. It's
yeah,
fascinating stuff.
yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Simon, thank you so much for coming to tell me about this.
absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And I'll keep you updated, and we'll see where it goes. And hopefully, they find out some more details, and hopefully it'll get on display. I think that's probably the right thing. So, as I said to someone yesterday, I was chatting to them, and it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of given me a real link and a kind of engagement and an excitement into the past. And I've been looking around at what's happened around the area where I live. And I think if things like that can excite other people, then that's a good thing. It's
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it is so exciting. It's not like you've just dug up an old bone from a couple hundred years ago. I mean, this is a person that lived, or was in the area, obviously, or at least buried in the area. Um, but we obviously there's going to be so many other mysteries too. Some that hopefully could be found out later, but other mysteries that we'll never know. We'll never know what language they spoke. We'll never know what they did as an occupation, because there were a lot of occupations even back then. But so there's so much mystery, but there's still a lot you can find out. It's fascinating. It's amazing.
Absolutely fascinating, yeah. And what an absolute chance find as well. But
if you were not there in that spot, like if you were, you were there 10 minutes later or whatever, you might not have seen it. So
I say in all likelihood it would have been washed away with the tide, and I mean it may have popped up somewhere else, but or not, could have been.
Well, you know what? I hope that the rest of it comes uncovered. That'd be amazing.
I must admit, I do take an extra little look around on the shore when I'm going out rowing now. Although someone did say to me about, if you find some more bones, then you really are going to become prime suspect. So maybe
yes, he knew where they were.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Simon, thank you so much for coming to tell me about this. This is amazing. And keep me updated, and take care. Stay safe.
And you, and so lovely to speak to you.
Thanks. And you too.